We have had yet another pushback on the NHS Palantir contract. These delays seem to be coming in thick and fast, and unfortunately today's article that I have to share with you is no different. This article that we're going to get onto in just a minute has new information as to when we can expect the contract announcement. And maybe even more interestingly, it talks about why these delays keep happening. Some of these reasonings are somewhat questionable, and I think if you've been following the Palantir NHS journey, you will find them very interesting. The article that we're looking at is from Digital Health, and I've spoken about a few different articles that they've released related to the FDP and the Palantir NHS contract a few times on this channel. But I thought it would be quite helpful just to firstly see who they are, what they're all about, and whether or not we can actually trust this information. On their website, they say Digital Health provides independent business policy and technology news, research and events, focused on developments in health IT in the NHS and UK health. Our coverage is focused, original and authoritative. Over 20,000 readers subscribe to Digital Health's newsletter. Now they've said they are independent, up here, independent news. From my own research, and I've not done a great deal of digging on this, they do seem to have quite a strong track record of being both unbiased and providing accurate information. But of course, you can go and look further into this if you like. So let's have a look at the article that's been published. It was actually published on the 30th of October, but it's only just come to my attention as I've seen it circulating on X. NHS England has not yet proven its case on FDP, with the award of the Federated Data Platform contract said to be delayed until mid-November. There it is. So we were originally meant to hear about who the supplier of the FDP is going to be back on 28th of September, I believe it was. That was then pushed to October, then moved out to the end of October. Now we are on the 6th of November, and we are being told that this is going to be delayed until mid-November. At this point in time, I'm not getting my hopes up. I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't even hear this year. If we actually heard the announcement come maybe early next year even, I don't know. It seems like we are given a new date and then that date gets delayed. We are given a new date and then it gets pushed out again. It seems like the reasons, and we're going to see some interesting reasons in this article in just a minute, as to why it keeps getting delayed is primarily based on potential public backlash. So there is the concern about an FDP. People don't really understand what it is, what it does with data, what it means for patients' data. That's one concern. And then on top of that, coupled with that even, you have the idea that this big US company, Palantir, may actually be the supplier of this FDP. And when you add those two together, you get a lot of misinformation about how this means that the US company is going to be stealing and spying on patient data. So it does seem to be like that's the reason causing this delay. But let's just go on here. NHS England appears to be seeking to drum up support for the FDP and secure public backing from health system leaders for its £480 million flagship data platform project. The belated efforts to win public endorsements comes just weeks before the expected award of the FDP contract, the selection process for which has been completed. So far though, public support for the project outside of the NHSE and some of the NHS pilot sites have been limited and lukewarm. We've seen this. You've only got to look at the online news articles that are coming out about the FDP and about Palantir to see what sort of information the public is getting on this. The average person will not understand and will not spend time actually finding out what an FDP is, what it does, what it means for data, and then finding out how the supplier of the FDP actually does or doesn't interact with that data and what they do with it. However, what they are seeing is articles saying that a US spy company is stealing data, and also there were things that happened in the past to do with controlling data, collecting data in the NHS that is sort of leaking into this and making the public even less confident. We also had that Alex Karp interview with Victoria Derbyshire on the BBC a week ago. Now, unfortunately, that interview seemed to only concern the public further. And that was because the interview was sort of steered in a direction all towards questions about, will Palantir be accessing patient data? Will Palantir be sharing patient data? Will they be stealing it? Will they be supplying it, selling it? It wasn't really allowing Alex Karp to talk about how the FDP works and how Palantir can help the NHS, unfortunately. Earlier in October, 14 medical directors from trusts involved in FDP pilots agreed to put their names to an NHSE open letter supportive of FDP. So I covered this letter on my channel. But basically what it was a letter addressing the need, the requirement, the necessity for an FDP, how beneficial it would be for the NHS. It didn't really go into detail about who the supplier should be or anything like that. It was more, I think Palantir actually mentioned though, but it was more focused on why an FDP is necessary. And we can see 14 medical directors put their names down in support of this. Interestingly, and this is interesting, it seems to be the people that are either working within the NHS on these pilot sites or have had close contact or understand Palantir, understand an FDP, that are in favour of this. So those 14 medical directors that were involved in the FDP pilot, so physically can see the real world applications of this and how it works and the benefits of doing so, are the ones that are supportive of it. It's the people, the general public, that don't really know what's going on, or the people within the NHS and other organisations that have never really, actually spent time with this, that aren't that supportive, which is interesting, I think. Then we move on to this. Digital Health News understands Integrated Care Board chief officers are now being asked to sign a similar letter, with suggestions that some are proving reluctant to do so, and with only about half of the 42 ICB chiefs thought to be willing so far to add their names. When you have trusted people, medical directors, so they've got that status, they work within the NHS, these are trusted people, signing a letter to say that they support this, what that does is that gives the public some confidence. That is why they now want another letter signed by the ICB chiefs. In case you have no idea what the Integrated Care Board are, they are basically a statutory body within the UK that are responsible for planning and delivering health and healthcare services within their local area. And they are led by a team of chief officers. And it's those chief officers that run the day-to-day operations of the ICB. And that is what they're looking for. They're looking for these people to sign a similar letter to those 14 medical directives to say that it is necessary. And again, this would help public confidence. But it seems like at the moment, only about half of them are actually willing to do that, which is a bit of a shame. But I do wonder why that is. Let's see. Let's just carry on reading actually. If true, this would suggest significant reservations exist among ICB leaders, particularly concerning as these are some of the main future users of the platform. I think, and I don't know if they're doing this, I think these people should be given direct access to some of the pilot data to actually look what's happened once an FDP is being used, or maybe they can actually get hands-on experience and then decide from that point onwards what they think about this. In my opinion, no one can make an actual judgment unless they've got all of the information needed to do so. If they try this out, they look at all the data, they talk to the right people, they fully understand what's going on, and then they don't want to support it because of whatever, I think that's absolutely fine. Everyone's entitled to their own opinions, but I just worry that they haven't actually had the experience to make that judgment. At the national level, it's also striking that none of the royal colleges, the BMA, so the British Medical Association, or big medical charities have publicly backed the programme. Again, when these sort of bodies do that, when the important people back something, or an organisation that's really key in the healthcare sector back something, it does add that level of sort of guarantee, like saying to the public, we've looked into this is all right, it's got our stamp of approval. And unfortunately with this, it hasn't really happened like that. In a June BMJ article, BMA deputy wrote this: the British Medical Association is calling for NHS England and the Department of Health and Social Care to have an open discussion with us, clearly outlining the scope of data they plan to collect, how exactly they plan to use it, and what role Palantir will play, and how this meets the NHS core values. This kind of summarises it. This sums it up to a T. The issue here is just not understanding, and that's absolutely fine. If someone doesn't understand something, they will be a little bit hesitant. It's understandable. So I think what we need is education. Then people can make decisions based on information. That's all it comes down to, because we can see here the scope of data they plan to collect, bit of a weird way of saying it, how they plan to use it, what role Palantir will play. So there's obviously concern about the supplier and about Palantir in particular, And actually, does this go completely against the NHS's core values? Okay, we'll move on from this. This call for greater transparency echoed some of the questions raised by the Faculty of Clinical Informatics in a position paper published earlier this year that put FDP into the context of past and current data sharing arrangements and initiatives within the NHS. I spoke about this in a previous video. It looks like they're going to speak about this in the article. But back in 2013, there was something called the Care.Data program. This was basically rolled out in England, and it was to use and collect patient information, patient data. In particular, the point of it was to extract data from GP practices and put all of that into one centralized database. That database was then going to be shared with third parties. So we're talking government agencies, different researching parties, and so on. And the reason for that was to basically try and improve the quality and efficiency of healthcare. So it makes sense why they did it, but clearly they were trying to share data with relevant people that they thought was safe. This didn't go down too well. And because of the backlash from that, the program actually failed in 2016. And there are a few different similarities in terms of the language used, maybe incorrectly, inaccurately, between Care.Data and this FDP. Namely, collecting data and putting it into one centralized database and then doing whatever with it. In my opinion, they're completely different, but I do understand why the average person would feel that these two things are very, very similar. And knowing what happened back then and the concerns over that, it's kind of leaking into this FDP as well. And yeah, we just need transparency. You haven't got to go very far to actually understand what an FDP is. It's all on the NHS website. It literally outlines a Q&A of will data be shared? Will data be sold? What will Palantir have access? All of this stuff is very, very easily accessible, but obviously we've got a lot of media going on that is saying the complete opposite. Overall, there is a general lack of transparency about many aspects of the FDP, which is reminiscent of recent history of Care.Data. That's what I was just speaking about. General practice data for planning and research, that's what they've said. There is a need to build trust by taking concrete action on privacy and transparency. Trust cannot be earned through communications and public engagement alone. I agree, it's all well and good saying we won't do something or, we promise we won't do anything, but actually seeing it in action is very different. However, what I will say in terms of Palantir doing this FDP is they work with some of the biggest health organizations in the world. They have been working with different government organizations, even outside of the healthcare sector, for many decades. There has never once been an issue with privacy, transparency, misuse of data, anything like that at all, ever. The NHS and other UK government organisations have worked with Palantir. Again, to date, there has never been any concerns. And the UK government, organisations, businesses in the UK and outside of the UK, some of the biggest organisations in the world, are continually going back to Palantir to help them with their data requirements. So I think actually the evidence is there. Okay, right, let's just get down to this bit. This is where it gets quite interesting. We can see here, FDP scope not clearly defined. Perhaps the key recurring problem with a mission to win hearts and minds on the FDP is that there has been a lack of consistency or clarity on what an FDP is, what it's for, and what its scope covers. And the confusion appears to grow the more the NHSE seeks to explain. People are confused. Obviously, we know this. This has very direct parallels with Care.Data, where the scope and purpose of the project and who would have access to patient data repeatedly change, fatally undermining public confidence. And that's what it comes down to. I think even if they've picked who the supplier is and that they're actually going to do this FDP because of the pilot sites and they know how valuable this is going to be, with patients' lives being they're the end user here. That's who's going to benefit. They're probably a little bit concerned, especially after the backlash from the interview and other articles that have come out since, how the public are going to respond to this. Because at the end of the day, if people within the organisations and the public both respond badly, like they did with Care.Data, the programme finished. And that could happen here, and I don't think they're going to want that to happen at all. NHSE's original published material on FDP said it was to cover 5 key areas. Elective recovery, to address the backlog of people waiting for appointments and treatments. I can speak from personal experience here. We do have a backlog issue. You can wait a long time for an appointment and definitely for treatment. Care coordination, to enable the effective coordination of care between local hospitals, care organisations and services, reducing the number of long stays in hospital, vaccination and immunisation, to continue to support vaccination of vulnerable people, ensuring fair and equal access, population health management, to help integrated care systems proactively plan services that meet the needs of their population, and supply chain management. We know that Palantir are very, very useful for all of these things. Evidence. I'm not making that up. It's evidence from other organisations that have utilised Palantir's software. To help the NHS put resources where they are needed most and to buy smarter so that they get the best value for money. But now it appears that these were rather loose initial case use scenarios, and the longer term ambition is much wider, having previously been described as a future operating system for the NHS. More recently, it is being described as a software to join up the NHS and enable direct clinical care. Addressing the October board meeting, the FDP was described as software that enables you to view data from different sources in one place on your computer screen. Obviously, that is a very simplified way of explaining it, but for the average person, I think that's a good explanation. It's a good starting point. That makes it easier for you to manage your patients, whether that is bringing down waiting lists or making it easier to discharge patients from hospitals, so all caregivers have access to the same information. This is the problem. The information within the NHS and related organisations is so disjointed. It's a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit everywhere. One person in the NHS can't see the same thing and get access to the same data that they need to make judgment calls on their patient that someone else within a different part of the NHS can. And that's what an FDP can really help with. It would solve a lot of problems, something as simple as that. And it's not been able to be achieved before. The new blog post further suggests that it will mean patients telling their story once. That's a really big deal. If you don't live in the NHS, let me just take a minute here. Sometimes you can go to the doctor and you can explain what's going on. Notes can be taken, letters can be sent, whatever. Months will pass, and then you find yourself not having the appointment you were promised. You don't know where the communication is being lost, and then you have to start again and explain the information again, or explain it when you get to the next part of the stage, the next step, and it's very time consuming. It's very unnecessary. A laudable aim, but a very significant scope creep, taking it far beyond being about analytics and resource coordination and into direct clinical care. It is precisely this lack of clarity of purpose and an apparent mixing up of very different data types with specific and different legal and information government requirements, that was a big sentence, that is fueling anxieties. Responding to a new blog, clinical informatics veteran Dr. Ian McNichol posted on X, saying, "It is mixing up operational service data, i.e. bed state with direct patient care, such as people telling their story once, which I understand was not in the scope of FDP." And then this person said, NHSE is conflating direct patient care and secondary uses of healthcare data, which means that either the scope of the FDP has drastically changed compared to the tender documentation, or the NHSE doesn't know the difference. So people are having concerns that the scope of how and what the FDP is and what it's used for has changed since the documentation was outlined originally. The same NHSE blog says that the purpose of the FDP is to enable NHS organisations to bring together operational data, currently stored in separate systems, to support staff to access the information they need in one safe and secure environment. We hear time and time again with Palantir, FDP, bringing all the data into one centralised source of truth. This could be the number of beds in a hospital, size of waiting lists for elective care services, or the availability of medical supply. Right, this bit I have a problem with. Limited evidence of benefits. A further problem undercutting the case for FDP is the lack of openly published peer-reviewed evidence on the benefits. In presentations and blogs, NHSE has cited a range of anecdotal benefits from pilot sites and extrapolated hundreds of millions in potential savings that could be achieved, but not published any hard evidence to back this up. And then I think it's going to go on to explain the Chelsea and Westminster Trust example. Okay, what else have they got to say here? This sounds a tremendous result for patients. Okay, what I have a problem with here is the word anecdotal evidence. I don't think that's the case at all. And also, it's not hard to see the impact that Palantir are having on other healthcare organisations. And also, Palantir have worked with the NHS a number of times now, and every single time there has been clear evidence of how successful that's been. I don't know what else they would want. Do they want Palantir to be working with the NHS without the public knowing for many, many years, maybe decades, and then saying, let's have an FDP? Because by then, So many families have had to suffer already. I don't know. I understand that they need evidence in order to back up spending this amount of money, but I think the evidence is there that the NHS is just not running as efficiently as it already should be. That's enough. Then we've got Palantir that have worked with the NHS that have proven very, very helpful. To me, that makes sense. Okay, I'm not going to read all of this. Pause and read it if you want to. Again, the results sound impressive, but they appear so far to be at least largely anecdotal. What was the cohort of patients studied? In what specialities? Is it realistic to extrapolate such big savings from a small number of pilot sites? My background's in science, and I'm very aware that it's sometimes not great to just extrapolate data from very, very small amounts of participants to very large amounts. It doesn't, what's the word? Correlation is not causation. I think that's the right saying. God, that's a blast in the past. I just think this is way more important than really nitpicking here. That's what it seems like this is doing. We're going to scroll through some of this because we're nearly at the bottom here. So let's just have a look at this bit here. The reality is that objectively, FDP should still be considered very much firmly at the pilot stage, and developing a solid body of published evidence and evaluation will take time. While early results sound promising, there is no indication that there is significant evidence of benefits to yet proceed with awarding £500 million contract, whatever the political pressure to do so. FDP may or may not prove to be an important development. It's still too early to tell. I don't know what else. The NHS is struggling. An FDP clearly will help. But in a system as complex and varied as the NHS, anyone offering magic should be treated with skepticism and have convincingly proved their claims, and should have to prove their claims with robust evidence that can be independently verified. At this point, FDP rather appears far more okay. I don't even know what to say. How much longer do they wait until they announce whether they're going ahead with an FDP, and how many patients will suffer in the meantime? If public trust is to be gained and the NHS is to have a realistic chance of gaining potential benefits from new data platforms and realising the value of its rich data assets, then NHS England and the Secretary of State should hold off on any contract aware and take more time. They should have the courage to invest in proper evaluation of the pilots, dissemination of lessons and findings, and then use this as the basis for engaging with the patients. Failure to do so in advance of the contract award risks repeating the mistakes of care.data and poisoning the well of public trust in use of NHS data at scale for another decade. I agree, if the public aren't on board, it does risk damaging the trust for longer, for sure. But I think this is about actually taking time to educate the public. That will help build trust. Be fully transparent, be fully honest, take time to educate, and then they can make their mind up. Because I think that a lot of people, once they have the information they need, will understand how this actually benefits them and their families. Okay, guys, so it seems like we're not expecting any announcement really anytime soon, perhaps in 2 to 3 weeks, but don't get your hopes up for that. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comments below. Take some time to read this article. I'll link it in the description. And let me know your thoughts. If there's anything that I'm missing that you'd like to add, do so in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video very shortly.